Monday mornings with Matt and Kevin. Topics that come up around the dinner table will be given the truth treatment with no punches held and no falsehood left standing. These two will debate real life issues from a Catholic perspective every Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern. Make the world Catholic again.
Make the world Catholic again, indeed. Welcome in, everybody. Monday mornings with Matt and Kevin here on the Catholic Family Podcast. Over the weekend, Donald Trump's Twitter account was reinstated by Elon Musk, so we will certainly be keeping an eye on that. But for today, November 21st, we have a really exciting episode for you. I have two guests, Brittany Sellnar and Megha Verma are both joining me today. They're going to be talking about politics, art, and a whole bunch of other issues. So we're going to go first to Megha, who's joining me right now for the first topic today. Live from the UK, right? Megha, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Yeah, I recently moved to the UK because I got married. So
congratulations. Yeah, congratulations. So Megha, what do you have for us in terms of? I know you spent a lot of time studying art. You run art courses. You put out a lot of material about actually studying art, right? People, they don't examine art the way I think art is meant to be examined. There's often a lot of hidden messages in color and skin tone and to the finest detail. So what can you teach us today? What can you offer us about your expertise in all this, and what do you have to share?
Well, first of all, I would like to talk about why it's important to study the arts in the first place, because I come from a science and technology background. I did my master's in neuroscience. So, I spent 8 long years in STEM, and I was doing a PhD when I left. And I realized when I was there that scientists are very good at collecting data, but data is not the same thing as information, because information is how we package data in a certain pattern and put it in a hierarchy to answer a question. So you can't actually have information from data unless you have a question or a goal that you're trying to accomplish. So for example, if you have, all the prices of food in a grocery store, it doesn't matter. Like, all of those numbers are meaningless unless you're asking a question at the end of it. So what is the average price of meat, So then you can actually get information. So what I found in the sciences is that people were very, very good at collecting data, but very bad at collecting information. And specifically, I think this is on a larger scale, this is due to a problem in society of utilitarianism without an end. So imagine that, utilitarianism is a word that most people will be familiar with. It's a worldview in which everything has value insofar as it has utility. But this worldview is incomplete because it doesn't consider utility for what, and most of the time this question is unconsciously answered for us: utility for making money. So when we have this unconscious framework in everybody's mind for everything that they do, then what happens is that you don't actually get a richer society, which you would expect. If everyone's main goal is to make money, you would get a richer society. What they get instead is a society that's constantly running on a treadmill for money, but never actually becomes wealthy. Whereas when you had societies I love studying the Renaissance because it's so at odds, like on a spiritual level, from modern Western society. The Renaissance was the opposite of a utilitarian society because the main goal for them was to glorify, especially the Italian Renaissance. I'll be specific for the academics who might be listening, but their primary goals were to glorify themselves for all eternity, and to glorify God, and also to remind people of their religious ideals at all times. You would think that that kind of society might be very poor because it's not focused on making money. And yet they were extremely wealthy, and they built some of the most beautiful cities that people still make pilgrimages to go see. So it's a very interesting question that sometimes when you run towards something directly, you don't get that thing. And I think it's because utilitarianism is all arrows. It's like a means to an end, but it doesn't have any end. Like money could be one end, but people aren't really clear about that because when they make money, then they want other things with that money. Money itself is an arrow. It can never be an end. That's why modern utilitarianism fails, because money itself is not an end. It's a means to an end for something. Like, what do you use that money for? Do you use it for entertainment? Do you use it for freedom? Do you use it for comfort, shelter, etc.? After your basic necessities, you have to think on a grander scale, what are people using their money for? Money is kind of like a proxy for power. So if you're just constantly focused on building power, but you don't have an end for that, then you are actually less motivated and less focused on how to build that power, because you might be sacrificing those things that you built that power for. And the perfect example for this is a surgeon who became the surgeon because they wanted to have more power in life. They wanted more prestige, they wanted more money, they wanted security, and then and freedom to move wherever they wanted, because poverty by its very definition is a type of limitation on your life. But the surgeon, if he spends 16 hours a day or like 100 plus hours a week working, even if he's making that money that would buy him freedom and prestige, he can never actually enjoy that freedom because he gives it up in the process. Do you see what I mean? So I think, yeah, like, it's like a lot of rambling thoughts, but the arts offer people like a recalibration at the end of the day to understand why they're doing everything. What is the point?
Yeah, Megan, I was actually going to jump in and you hit on something that really stuck out to me when you brought up cities and how cities used to look, right? And, I've seen pictures even recently as to, it was almost like a camera viewing a single part of the street from, say, today, and then the same spot maybe 100 years ago or what have you. And I know, you being in England, I think you made something, I don't know if it was a tweet or an Instagram post, but how neat it is to be in a place or to see a place where somebody's like, hey, this place is 800 years old.
Yeah.
Right. And, and you see that. And I think, art is expressed in the way we design our cities. It's expressed in the way that we design our culture. And like you said, it has an end to it. Right. And so what do you think, because you kind of touched on how people are, they're working to build up all of these things, like, they've got a job like a surgeon where they're making a lot of money, but they can't use it for freedom or for, a nice whatever they might be doing because their time is so engrossed in their work. Maybe can you explain a little bit or talk a little bit about how, the purpose of art maybe back then, because I believe that, sculptors, they didn't put their names on their thing, was to glorify God, as you said before, like they didn't even take credit for a lot of their work. Do you have any thoughts on how, maybe an author's, or not an author, but an artist's purpose has kind of maybe shifted or changed over the centuries?
So I've actually written in depth about this on my Substack. It's an article that I wrote called "What Killed the Arts," and I explained in depth like how that shift occurred specifically during the Reformation in the 16th century, where the artist had to dramatically shift his business plan and his business model in order to make a decent living from the arts. And that shift in his business model for making money is what caused the arts to shift from being the arts to being entertainment, the entertainment industry. Because my hypothesis is that when we expose the arts and judgment of the arts to the free market to decide, then what happens is it becomes entertainment instead. So we call what would be the arts in our society is actually the entertainment industry. So our Netflix movies and TV shows, our top Billboard artists making songs, playing music. So all of these things, concerts, they're all classified under entertainment and not art, which is a very important distinction because entertainment is something that appeals to our most easily accessible hedonistic senses, whereas the art is something that um, calls you to be a nobler version of yourself, to contemplate it. So, for example, reading classic literature or appreciating a very beautiful piece of classical music. It's not easily accessible. It takes an attention span and some kind of like study, some kind of patience in order to appreciate it. But you'll notice if you ever are curious whether something is art or whether something is entertainment, there's a very easy test you can do. Um, just after you've finished with that thing, whether it's entertainment or art, think about how you feel afterwards. Do you feel exalted? Are you like looking at things in your ordinary life in a different way? Or do you feel depleted and you've forgotten what you saw? So, for example, I got TikTok when it first came out, and like I noticed that after like an hour on TikTok, I didn't remember anything that I saw. It was so mysterious. Or like, if you ask me to sing any pop song that I've heard in the last 5 years, like I don't actually remember the lyrics. But if you ask me to sing the lyrics of like a song that really deeply touched me, then I can remember them. Um, or like, a Netflix TV show that you binged, like you'll notice that there's some shows that actually make you see the world differently afterwards, make you judge people differently or situations, and some that just are forgettable and you just watch them in the moment and were entertained. Um, where was I going with this? You asked how the arts changed.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so the artist during the Renaissance was making money from patronage. So the church was the number one patron, but also as wealthy families. Um, Titian is a great example of someone who didn't really make money from the church. He was a portrait painter, and he got paid by wealthy families all over Italy who commissioned him, and he became kind of a celebrity because he had a journalist friend who would write about his work. And so the artist in this time period, though, by and large, did not make a bunch of paintings and then hope to sell them. He got his patrons first and then made only what was commissioned. And the way that he got patrons is because he was part of a guild. So the guild would um, give him some kind of credibility, so that anyone who wanted to commission an artist would simply go to the guild and say, okay, who's the best artist to do this kind of painting? And then they would recommend them. So it was like a system was in place. And then if you wanted to be part of a guild, like at 10 years old, you'd become an apprentice. And then after being an apprentice for many years where you learn the basics, then maybe you get to paint a little bit on different paintings. Um, and then you get like, your training is complete, and then you are a full artist and you become a member of a guild, and you can open your own workshop. Um, so that's how artists made money, and the church would pay big money for commissions. So, for example, Bernini made an amazing living as an artist. He's the sculptor responsible for a lot of the structures in the Vatican. He's responsible for Apollo and Daphne, a very famous sculpture. Um, and he's considered to be one of the best sculptors, who was the rightful heir of like Michelangelo. Like that's how good he was. Whereas artists post Reformation they're really changed. They would make a bunch of artwork and then go out to the marketplace and hope to sell it. So they started catering their work to what sells instead of what is like what they want to make. So when the church commissioned something, they said, okay, make something to glorify Saint Teresa. The artist has a lot of freedom to make what he thinks is an interesting and incredible piece. He gets to actually be an artist. Whereas when an artist is just focusing on what sells for the masses, he's going to lower his quality and make something as easily accessible as possible.
Yeah, let me ask you a question on that because I remember watching a talk from a few years ago, and it was a debate actually on the biblical event of the Annunciation, where the angel Gabriel appears to the Blessed Virgin Mary and tells her that she would become the mother of Christ. And there's a famous painting of this event, and I don't know, I can't think off the top of my head who might have painted it, but there was a debate around accuracy, right? And it was like, in this moment, would the Blessed Virgin Mary have genuflected before the angel? Would she have knelt before the angel? Or would the angel have knelt before her? And there was this interpretation of, kind of blending art and kind of blending accurate, say, theology. So maybe if you have any thoughts on, do you think that when looking at art of a particular event, so this event took place, say, 2,000 years ago, but people are creating it in art today, do you think they should be free to kind of put their own interpretation on how it might have looked, or do you think they should strive for a historical accuracy in the sense that, you know what, I have to draw the Blessed Virgin Mary standing in my work or paint or whatever because she never would have knelt before an angel or genuflected before an angel? So how do you think? What do you think? In terms of that debate of accuracy with historic events and actual art today.
So, if we look at the history of this type of religious art, there's many artists who have already gotten in trouble for this. So, for example, Veronese, Mantegna, they would paint biblical events of biblical characters wearing clothes that people wore in contemporary Venice, of their time period.
Mm-hmm.
So they
Mm-hmm.
got in trouble for that because it was not, historically accurate clothing. Like, why would these biblical characters be wearing a dress that someone wears in 15th century Italy? So
Mm-hmm.
um, it's already happened. And I think rather than focusing on the material reality of the historical event, it's actually good that artists I think it's good that artists take their artistic liberty to describe an event in a story because um, they're capturing the spirit of what happened rather than the physicality of it. And I think if something like, did Gabriel kneel or not? I think there's a very famous um, altarpiece by Giotto where the angel is kneeling for the Annunciation and Mary is sitting on a throne. Um, so it's like because it's up for debate anyway, and there's no, set rules about it. I think it's okay that they paint it like that, because they're capturing the spirit of the story in the way that they understand it. Um, and there's, different people show different events in different ways. Caravaggio is famous for depicting biblical events with a lot of gore and a lot of you know, like he shows kind of the hideousness of these gory events and reminds us that it's not all flowers and rainbows. Um, so it's because of the type of person Caravaggio was that he could see the world in that way and see the stories in that way. So I think limiting artists' ability to interpret stories and represent them how they want would leave us with Egyptian hieroglyphics because Egyptian
Mm-hmm.
hieroglyphics, I suppose um, Orthodox iconography is also very similar to this,
Yes.
where they
Yes.
have
Yes. Yes.
very, very strict rules about how they can depict things because their artwork is not really merely art. It's like a way of communication with the divine. So for both Egyptian hieroglyphics and iconography, I could be wrong about the iconography. There's a lot more about it that I don't know. Um, but with Egyptians, people think it's so funny how they make these hieroglyphs of people and they think, oh, it's because the Egyptians couldn't draw. But actually, they could draw. It's just that they had very strict rules because the hieroglyph was a form of communication. So if you wanted to communicate a foot, you would always draw the foot in profile because that's the angle at which a foot looks most like a foot. But the eye would look most like the eye looking head on. So you'd have a face in profile because that's the most characteristic way of showing a face, but then you'd have the eye looking straight ahead. Same for like the legs and the hips. And then you just get that traditional, like that quintessential hieroglyphic look. Or they'd show like a pond from above, but then show the fish sideways in the pond. And that's obviously wrong. And then the trees would not be looking at trees like aerially from above. The trees would be like flat out on all sides. And that's because they said, well, if we draw the trees from an aerial perspective over this pond, then someone looking above wouldn't know if they're trees or they're bushes, right?
True.
So that's how their mind
Wow.
works with this. So they said, okay, we know that trees look kind of like bushes when you look from above, but we have to make sure that the message is crystal clear. So we have to draw the trees laying flat, even though
Makes
that's
me
not, correct perspective.
Yeah, it makes me think of how you've probably seen those drawings, the street art, right? Where like it's painted on a road, but if you're standing at a certain angle, it looks like there's a giant hole or in the road or a cliff that you're falling off, where it's just perspective, it's just art. And you have to be able to look at it at the right angle to get the actual effect. Not to be redundant with this, but what do you think about if we take historical events, again, I'll go back to Christianity here, like we take Christ, right? He was one man who, had a certain skin tone, had a certain eye color. What do you think about interpretations of somebody like that? Like, because I have seen some beautiful paintings of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Japanese culture, in, even like Coptic, culture, American culture, where they change her skin tone, they change her lips, they change her eyes, they change her hair. Obviously, she was only one person who had only one sort of skin tone and whatnot. So, do you support, different interpretations of maybe a historical figure, or do you think that we should try to be, accurate in our depiction of them, or do you see both sides to that? What do you have to say about that?
I think I see both sides, and I think the side that wants to keep the character consistent with historical accuracy, I think that side is not looking at art as an artwork, looking at it as more of a historical account, like an artifact or like a science diagram. Like this is how a hot air balloon works. Like that would be you have to make it as accurate as possible. Whereas an artwork is not really about the material reality of things. It's about the idea that that artwork has conveys through its formation. So I don't think that historical accuracy is necessary to have a good work of art. So, for example, if someone made a fantastic painting about Mary or like from the Bible, and unfortunately, but like the characters were all black, and that wouldn't be accurate because the characters in the Bible are Middle Eastern. Like, would that artwork be discredited as a bad work of art simply because their skin color is wrong? I don't think that's true, because that artwork could be very fantastic in its own right and tell the story in a magnificent way that causes people to internalize certain ideas that they didn't think about before. And so by its own right, it would still be an amazing work of art. I think historical accuracy is for historical documents, not for works of art.
Yeah, I can see that. And it kind of draws me. I have like two questions that I kind of want to bridge into, but I'll go to this one first. Norman Rockwell. I went to his museum in Massachusetts a few years back now, and I loved his work. And it made me think of how you kind of just said, is it entertainment or is it art? And so, there's galleries and you walk through and there's descriptions of each painting and how, the idea behind it and what it kind of represents. But then I can't think of his name, but his son had an exhibit as well. Norman Rockwell's son had his own little room. And the art, if you can call it that, in my opinion, was completely inverse from his father. It was almost as if, do you remember that meme? It was like a banana taped to the wall, and they're like, "This is modern art today." It was very similar to that, where you went from these beautiful, like early 1900s paintings of real life diners or whatever to like this very strange, abstract sort of like, here's a twisted piece of metal. Let's put it behind glass to protect it so nobody touches it. Do you think art like that can be beautiful, or is it objectively like, wow, what happened here?
I don't think that's real art. I think that's trolling. That's just like
Like,
attention seeking. That's not art
but
at all.
so
It's
why? Let me just jump in because yes, I looked at this. I'm like, who takes this seriously? But there were people who were very much like, wow, let's look at this. Like they took it kind of seriously. What do you think they're looking for? What are they trying to find?
I think they're trying to be intellectuals and they're like completely out of touch with their senses. Like they're trying to show people how sophisticated they are by looking at that work
Hmm.
and really like the people who love that kind of work the most are art critics because if you see like a bunch of scribbles on a canvas or like a
Yes, yes,
banana taped
yes,
on a wall,
exactly. Yeah.
it's it's impossible to tell what that's about because it's actually about nothing. And so the art critic can then project their entire personal philosophies onto that work of art because it's not resistant onto that work. I wouldn't even call it a work of art because it's not going to resist anything back because it's nothing. It's just a banana, you know?
Hmm.
And so they can write essays and essays. Whereas when you look at a Norman Rockwell painting of the young teenage couple on a date
Yes.
drinking a
Hmm.
milkshake,
Hmm.
what can you really write about that? You don't really need to say anything. The artwork speaks so profoundly for itself. It's just a piece about innocence, innocent love. It's cute. It's making people nostalgic for a certain time in their lives, or maybe if they have kids, they're thinking about that. It's just
Hmm.
capturing a moment that is both ordinary and extraordinary, and it's archetypal. The puppy love stage of youth when you're first figuring out that you can have crushes on people. So these kind of artworks, you can't write a lot about them because they're so good. And
Hmm.
I realized this firsthand when I was teaching my art club and I had a lesson on Ivan Shishkin. And for most of the Ivan Shishkin is like an amazing landscape artist from Russia in the 19th century. And
Okay.
he was part of this group called the Wandering Artists, the Wanderers. And his landscapes were, boring to write about or talk about because you couldn't say anything about them, but they were magnificent. They were
Hmm.
beautiful. And you actually did want
Hmm.
to look at them for a long time because there was a lot to take in and look at. Like he captured the essence and feeling of being in a rainy, muddy day without you ever having been there. He captured the spirit of the landscape,
Hmm.
and that had never been done before. So I can see why art critics would prefer the crappy art because then they can write more about it and then they can get citations and then they can get tenured positions. Um, but art that is actually good speaks for itself.
Yeah, I was just pulling up a picture here because I wanted to refresh my memory. So, like you said, I'm remembering the people walking through the Norman Rockwell part, right? And you are 100% right. It's almost like you describe my experience. People are looking at these pictures of, again, the couple sharing the milkshake or whatever, and there's nostalgia. Like, wow, it looks comfortable, it looks warm. You can almost feel like a good feeling from it, but okay, the kind of, I guess you could say, just the conversation stops there. But I pulled up some images. His name is Peter Rockwell, the son, and there's a blob of clay with 2 feet on the bottom of it. And I remember people, like I said, looking at this like, wow, almost like they're trying to interpret like what is actually going on here. And I think that might kind of point something out here is the pictures that Norman Rockwell painted, what's there to interpret, right? There's two
Yeah.
people sitting here. But what is this mess? What is this blob of clay or, wire sticking out?
Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, do you think that, so is the artist in this instance, Peter Rockwell, is he intentionally trolling? Or do
Yeah,
you think,
they're
yes, huh,
intentionally trolling.
it's an intentional?
They may not be consciously aware of it, but they are. It's like, when you start to when you're a little kid and everyone's listening to your story for the first time, like in a big group, and
Hmm.
then you unintentionally start lying and exaggerating to make your story more exciting so that people will listen to you longer.
Hmm.
It's that feeling.
Yeah.
And all kids have experienced this.
True.
And then you feel yourself, and then afterwards you ask yourself, why did I lie?
Hmm.
Why why did I make up all this stuff?
You had to
But
engage.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's like when you're aware of these behaviors, you can understand them better. And you have to realize that the art museum and the art critic and the academy and the salon, these are all very new things. Art in the Renaissance, there was no salon, there was no academy. There was a guild to train people how to create the work, but that guild's responsibility was not like, reviewing artists or reviewing art or getting citations or tenured positions. And the people buying the artwork were not trying to do that either. They were not critics. They were not getting these commissioned paintings to put them in a museum. They were getting them to put them in their house or
Mm,
in a church or in a public square. So these artworks were literally made for people to enjoy, not for stuffy, onanistic, navel gazing academics to talk about. So when Bernini made the Four Rivers fountain in Piazza Navona in Rome, that is like one of the most
mm.
magnificent fountains I've ever seen in my life. Like I remember when I walked in and saw it for the first time, like my sister and I were just like our jaws were on the floor at how incredible it was. And it's like it engulfed you because it was so large and it forced you to walk around because it was so big you couldn't really make sense of the whole picture.
Mm. Sure.
And we were just in awe. And it was really made for people. It was not made for academics to interpret. Of course, you can interpret it because, he'll have put symbols in there or to represent, the different rivers or like historical, mythical references that he's making in the fountain. And even those symbols were made for people because the average person couldn't read, was not always educated
Mm.
and able to read. So, but symbols were things that everyone could recognize. So that's the creation of the art museum, ironically, is probably what contributed most to killing the arts because it
Mm.
created this academic class of interpreters.
So let me ask you this then. Let me just take Da Vinci, for example. His work is in, museums around the world that are, again, very, protected with security. They're behind glass. You can't access it. You can't touch it. My first question would be, was somebody like Da Vinci famous in his time where, like, did people recognize him to be, or anybody else? I'm just using him as an example, but do you think these artists are recognized while they're alive, or is it centuries have gone by, so we see them in a different light? And do you think that was their work, again, with Da Vinci, was he somebody who, do you think he did private things for people? Like, is there hidden work that will never see that maybe he painted for a friend or for, a guy who said, hey, can you, work on this for me? Do you think their art is both public and private, or do you think they were painting or working or sculpting or what have you for extreme situations like the church or for anything in Rome or France or what have you?
So I think you asked a couple of questions there. So
Yeah.
like modern Western people have this idea of artists as always being the underdog and always
Mhm.
being starving, not making money in their time, and
Yes,
only
yes,
recognized
yes.
posthumously.
Yeah.
That's completely wrong. The most like the best artists in the world always made tons of money while they were alive. Like it's only the shitty artists that kind of like for the most part there are some exceptions, but it's only like the mediocre artists that were remembered way after. But I think the most of the artists that I've studied in their time period, they were immensely wealthy and recognized. So Bernini was
Hmm.
really famous, Da Vinci was really famous, Titian, people were lining up to get portraits painted by him.
Hmm.
Lawrence Alma Tadema was fabulously wealthy. Edmund Leighton made tons of money and was the president of the Royal Academy of Art. Um, Bouguereau, the Academy didn't like him because his paintings were too boring because they couldn't talk about them. But his paintings were beautiful to people who wanted to buy them, and he was, as a result, very wealthy. So, like for most, I think some exceptions are there. Like for example, Vermeer in Amsterdam, he never really sold any of his paintings and died in a lot of debt. But I think there's multiple reasons for that. One is that Amsterdam in that time period was like very it was like post-Reformation Amsterdam, so they didn't really appreciate it wasn't the artists who made the best art that was successful. It was the artists that could sell the most pieces to the buying public. And so it's
Hmm.
like, an amazing singer today who's singing like soulful music having to compete with Cardi B, and Cardi B is making more money, you
Right.
know?
Right.
It's not because Cardi B is a
Many
better
cases.
singer.
Hmm.
So I think it depends on the type of society. So, but there are many artists throughout history who have made lots of money from their artwork while they're alive and gotten recognition for it. With regard to whether or not there's any hidden work,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm
I
curious.
think that's a very interesting question, and I think that there are a lot of art historians who are devoted to, work at like Christie's or things like that,
Hmm.
who are trained at recognizing an artist's hand in different works. And so sometimes pieces turn up that, somebody inherited or somebody found, and they bring it to a specialist, and that person can recognize if it's done by this artist or if it's, just a nobody who made it. And they do x-rays to see like what was the
Hmm.
underpainting, what was the sketching like, what type of paint did they use, what type of a board was it. Sometimes it'll be signed, sometimes it won't. But I think the most infamous example for this is because he ran a very big workshop where he had like 40 students working in his workshop for him, and they paid him money in order to get training under him. So many of his students adopted very similar styles to Rembrandt. And so actually a lot of paintings that were attributed to Rembrandt were done by his students or his followers, and they were not actually his. So it's kind of the opposite. Um, yeah, but I'm sure there's lots of paintings that will continue to turn up that have been done by old masters, but they were not found
Hmm.
earlier.
Do you think that there's an overanalysis sometimes? Because I remember when the news of I don't know if they did an X-ray on the Mona Lisa or what, but I remember this was like breaking, right? They said, oh, look, there's multiple layers of the Mona Lisa. There's, was it a woman at one point, or that was a man at some time or whatever? And all these like stories came out, and people started analyzing, right? Like, were there different undertones of color and all of that, and they start making all these cases. Do you think, like, if you were to go back um and say, ask him if you could ever do such a thing, like what was going on here, do you think there's a chance he might said, like, I was just playing with things, whereas
Yeah, that's
fast
probably
forward
the
to
most
now,
likely
people are
case. I think people are
overthinking?
um like especially the conspiracy theory crowd,
Mm,
they I mean not to like maybe some of the things they
I've been
say
in
are
it.
true. I
Yeah.
don't deny that.
Yeah.
But like I'm talking about like their nature. They
Mm,
like having secret knowledge that no one else
mm,
has. Like it makes
mm,
them feel special. It gives them some kind of importance in life, you know?
mm.
So they try to find secret knowledge. It's like the Robert Browning books. What is it? Da Vinci Code,
Yes,
all
yeah,
that stuff.
Dan Brown, maybe. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it fills their life with a bit of enchantment that they didn't
Mm.
have before. Did I say Robert Browning? I think it's because I was reading
Yeah, no,
I
yeah,
was
that's
I
okay.
was reading a poem by Robert Browning, but I was thinking of Dan Brown. Like I said the wrong word.
Yeah, that's okay.
Um, but yeah, I think they're trying to read too much into things, and
Yes, that's my
I think
question.
it's a symptom of the art critic culture when in fact all art is just is it's meant to be enjoyed. So you look at a painting like the Mona Lisa, instead of thinking so much about, oh, is this secretly a man? Is this secretly, is there like a
Right,
Fibonacci sequence to
right.
uncode and you can open this thing and like unlock these secrets? Like there's no point in doing that.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's pointless in my opinion. Because what are you
So,
going to do with that information? Is it going to lead to a treasure chest with money?
right, it doesn't gain you anything at all. And you hit on another point earlier that I wanted to kind of jump back on. So, about art versus entertainment. I was talking to a guy, it was earlier this year, I think, and he was telling me that his whole life he was a militant atheist and never set foot in a church, never talked about church, never saw a church, none of these things. And he said in the 1990s, it must have been 92, 93, I think he was referencing. Him and a few friends went on a trip, and I believe it was to Montreal. I think he said maybe Quebec, but I want to say Montreal. And he said him and his friends were outside this beautiful basilica that was there, and he told me, he said, so my friends and I, we decided to open the door and go in. He said to this day, and this was 2022 now. He said to this day, I remember the feeling that overcame me when I opened the doors and just looked up, because the beautiful art in this cathedral, this basilica, I can feel the feeling today that I felt 30-ish years ago. And I guess my question would be, what kind of killed that inspiration? Why is there so much ugliness in buildings, in churches, in museums? When you was in England, I'm sure you've seen some beautiful old, century old, multiple century old, millennial old buildings that just stand out, that elevate the soul. What killed it? Why are we building these? I think there's a movement in France too. I think there's this artist in France. He's building these ugly glass like box buildings, and people are impressed by this or what have you. What shifted? What changed? What brought about this ugliness that people are revering as something inspiring? What do you think?
I think that's a very complex question. I think it's not one thing, it's lots of things converging and manifesting in this one effect. There is the loss of belief in something that matters beyond your own life. So everyone thinks that you're just a meat computer in this body, and once you die, that's it. Like, even if you don't believe that you will go on, they don't even have families that they want to leave a better world for. They don't have any idea of belonging in some kind of line. So they don't have any respect for their ancestors, and they don't have any hope for their descendants. So they're kind of isolated on a metaphysical level. So they see no point in making things of lasting value. They see no point in anything beyond their life. So I think that's part of it, and that leads to a type of depression, because then why does anything matter if you're going to die in a couple decades? There's I think it's also a matter of bureaucracy, because architects, young people who want to build things that are beautiful, who want to make wonderful works of art in society, they just have so many barriers of bureaucracy against them, because the people who are the leaders of society have put those there, and even the ones who are the leaders, they might have inherited them, and they feel powerless in removing them, because they're just so much. And I think the bureaucracy, the paperwork, the institutions that are just bloated with administration are like primarily responsible for limiting the ability of artists to make good work, because making a building does cost money. And if
Yes.
a company is not willing to fund somebody's ideas because it doesn't go with city guidelines, or what the larger company wants them to build, or what the academics are saying in the papers to make, and they just won't fund it. So I think it's because the patrons are motivated by capitalism, rather than being motivated by higher ideals. And that's another reason for it. And so I think the idea of an aristocracy is, a noble class of society that has money and wants to use and is able to use it for things that won't necessarily make a profit, but will improve the lives of their citizens, of the people that they live with, immeasurably. And then also, leave behind something beautiful and amazing for their descendants. A great example of this is Notre Dame. So
Yeah.
the book about Notre Dame is actually about how it was built over the centuries by people who lived in that community, and it was built by generations and generations putting in work into Notre Dame. And it was very interesting because it talked about the fact that there were some people who worked on Notre Dame who would never see it finished, like their grandchildren or great-grandchildren won't see it
Wow.
finished. So it's that ability to see something is mattering beyond your life. I think metaphysically and philosophically, we don't have that. And also, the ruling class of our society is not run by ideals. They're run by, what makes the quickest profit while they're in power, because their power is also ephemeral.
So two questions. Do you think I posted a picture a while ago? It was a cathedral in France. However, from the 1200s, maybe. Do you think the talent to make that is gone? Can people do that anymore? And my second question is, I'm a little bit ignorant on this. I remember people saying, yeah, this is beautiful, but King, maybe Louis the Ninth, whoever might have been at the time, built this, but threw the country into debt because of it. Is there a lot of truth to a statement like that? Or do you think those are maybe some misconceptions or some lies being spread just to kind of, attack these beautiful buildings, these beautiful works of art?
I think it's meant to attack the work of art, because if we think about King Louis, who built Versailles and all of these beautiful
Yes.
palaces, building these palaces is not what put him into debt. What put him into debt was supporting the American Revolution, supporting the Americans, lending money all over the place to different wars. That's what put France into debt before the French Revolution, not building its palaces. And actually, its palaces and beautiful buildings uplifted the people and helped them feel that there's something worth living for, that they loved, that their country was a beautiful place to live, and they could enjoy these public spaces. I think Wrath of Nana is a great Twitter account I used to follow, and does a great job explaining how beautiful cities make the people who live in them more mentally healthy, and then mentally healthy people make for better societies with less crime and more camaraderie, and just better societies in general. And if you think about, like, is it worth making these useless artwork and buildings, and it could throw the country into debt? Think about how much wealthy countries today do that throws them into debt, that
Yeah.
offers
Yeah.
absolutely nothing to their people, like helping refugees from like other countries oceans away, while their own people are starving and unable to pay for
Right now.
heating during the
Yeah.
winter. Like, isn't that a waste? Or spending tons and like millions and billions of dollars building windmills that actually don't help the environment, kill birds, and also worsen the environment, because you're mining for the materials and funding the factories that are making them. So it's like there are a lot of ways that governments waste money, but I don't think the arts is one of them. And in fact, the money that you spend in arts pays you back in ways that you can never measure in material ways.
So is that talent gone though, Megha? Like, do you think people can still build that?
I think the raw talent, I don't think it's gone. I think I think it'll be difficult though to rebuild a society where you can collect people to build that again. But then again, we have like the power of technology to help us. But the thing is, if the arts are really killed, if something really kills them, you have to start again from scratch. And according to this art historian I love, Bernard Berenson, art goes through different stages of life, just like a living organism. So it goes from like primitive to archaic to to classic, So it goes through these stages as it's developing. So, you had in the early Renaissance, they didn't really understand perspective. And so even though there are many beautiful paintings, the perspective was off, or, if you look at Botticelli's Venus and you look at it carefully, and I have an article about this on my Substack, the tracing how art developed through the depictions of Venus over time. And in Botticelli's Venus, the arms and body parts are kind of lopsided and the wrong size and placed wrong. So if she were a real woman, she would be like really deformed. But it was still beautiful because, the spirit in the work was still there and it was masterful. So I think that in order to build up to that level of skill where we can build a Notre Dame again, it will be difficult, but I think it's hard to say that it's impossible because we have so much incredible technology today to help us.
Hmm. Yeah. I did see, I don't know if it was in Florida or somewhere down south here, where they did build something that was very reminiscent of, a 16th century building in France, and machines did assist as they wouldn't have back then, but people are like, wow, so it can be done, like the ability is there. Um, but there's just maybe the desire to do it, right?
The
And so
money.
just in the money, right? The money, and yes, more than anything. Just the last question though. So the classes that you teach and that you offer to students, what would you say um, your goal is? Like, what are you trying to teach or to leave with other people? Because your work is incredible. It's very fascinating, and even looking through your Instagram posts, your Instagram stories, the way you explain and even depict the works of art that you share is very it gets a conversation going, even mentally with myself. I think through it. So what would you say, like, you're trying to work towards with other people? What are you trying to spread? What's a goal of yours?
So I think I had this idea that the reason people don't value the arts or they overvalue mediocre art is that they don't know how amazing art can be. So the we in the modern West, you keep seeing the same five paintings over and over again to represent classical art, which is, the Van Gogh painting, the Gustav Klimt, the Kiss painting, you see a Monet painting, and that's just put on all the coasters. Oh yeah, and like, Michelangelo. That's it.
Hmm.
It's put on all the
Hmm.
posters, it's put on tote bags, it's put on like scarves, and that's the only thing people really know. If you ask an average person, name an artist, they'll say like Monet. Um, and that's on purpose, and it's tragic because these are these are good artists, but they're by no means the best artists, and they actually represent the moment when art declined. Like their work has traces of decline in them. Like Monet's art in the beginning was amazing, but it really became trash near the end, and people don't like to admit it because of his reputation, which is really tragic because they're denying their senses what their senses tell them is the truth because they're afraid to upset the academy. So what I try to do with my art lessons is show people. I don't put down artists. I don't spend it hating Monet. Um, I spend my classes just every week. I show a different artist, and we just look at his collection of work. We discuss each painting and what makes it interesting, a little bit of history about it, what makes it artistically interesting to look at, how does it tell a story. And I think when people see a lot of amazing art, they are able to compare in their minds because once you've seen, for example, Victor Vasnetsov painting of Ivan and the Grey Wolf carrying the princess through the woods, and it's so wonderful to look at. Or once you've seen, Vermeer's paintings, you just can't look at mediocre art again in the same way because there's something better out there. It's like if you've tasted gourmet food, if you've tasted the best chicken soup in the world from a gourmet restaurant, and you eat something that you bought like a ready meal from like the grocery store, like you
You
will no
know.
longer appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's very true. Just totally off subject, but my grandmother was like the best, in my mind anyway, the best cook in the world, and so her food was like, up here,
Yeah, so
and
you had a
so every
standard.
at a
So it's just
standard, of
about giving
course.
people standards again. And like,
Right. I
because this
I
type of art is
I
not
agree.
taught anymore in public schools anyway, in mainstream institutions.
And you're right. I think I'm, like I said earlier, I'm pretty ignorant on this. And there are names that the basics, Monet, you throw those names out there, but like, it's like what we've lost a lot. And I think education has slipped so much where, we don't focus on this anymore. We as a society, and I don't know numbers, but the average intelligence has had to just collapse. It's had to,
Yeah.
because because you don't hear any of this discussed anymore. I didn't learn it.
And the reason for that, I think, is the lack of standards that is put on people. People are encouraged to be accepted for who they are instead of being called to improve themselves to become the noblest version that they can be. When I was in university, I used to tutor students to help them write essays. So I would sit with them and try to figure out how they can structure their essay so they can get a good mark. And most students, age like 20, they can't even speak in a full sentence.
Yeah.
In fact, most people, I realized as I got older, cannot speak in full sentences. When I read their Instagram captions or how they talk, how they write, they cannot explain their most basic beliefs in a logical, coherent way. If they do speak in if they do speak at any length or write, it's all copy pasted propaganda in their writing. It's so bizarre to consider because they're not even aware how much their thinking is being infiltrated by media and its propaganda. And I think when you are not a good thinker, when you're not taught to read and write properly, your mind is more vulnerable to this infiltration because you have nothing in there to offer any defense.
Didn't you just post a headline of an article or whatever or maybe it was an Instagram caption, and the woman said that in order to speak before a group of people, she needs a Xanax? Wasn't that something that
was a medical student's blog that I reposted.
And so, all of these skills are lost. I think they still offer public speaking in schools. They still offer art in schools. But I think maybe just the level of interest people have as a whole, general population, I wonder if it's dipped. I remember when I was in college going to the writing lab for, we would be able to go there and people would help, with your writing and help develop your writing and all of that. And I remember sitting with people, and again, this is university, and looking at their work next to me, not to say I was anything special or gifted myself, but it's like, wow, this is like a first grader. I know kids who write better than this, and it's like people are getting dumber as they're getting older. I mean, I remember working with young kids, some very intelligent. I had, I'm thinking of some girls in my class some years ago now that when I taught, who were extremely intellectual in both, not just the way they wrote or did math or, performed on tests, but just the way they carried themselves. And I think a lot of that is lost. And so I love what you're doing. I love that you're, trying to bring people back into this beautiful world that is art. You got me interested. I need to sign up for your class. Do I get a discount? No. But no, I'm really, you're great to talk with, and it was a lot of fun. Any closing thoughts? Anything you want to maybe add before we wrap up today?
I would just say, if you want to know about the work that I do with the art club, my website's called classicalidealsedu.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Megha. It was great to chat with you, and always fun to spend time with you and learn a lot from you. So thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to take a quick break here on the Catholic Family Podcast, Monday Mornings with Matt and Kevin, November 21st, 2022 coming up. Brittany Sellnar will be joining me to talk politics. Stay tuned. Welcome back into Monday Mornings with Matt and Kevin on the Catholic Family Podcast. I have a very special guest with me today. I'm really excited to have her on the show. She is a Catholic political commentator, YouTuber, and author of the book Patriots Not Welcome. Brittany Sellnar is joining me today. Brittany, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Matt. I really appreciate it.
So one of the things, Bert, that I wanted to share with our audience today is your book, Patriots Not Welcome. I remember when I got this book, and it came in the mail, and I was like, you know what? I'll pick it up this weekend. It was, I think it was an afternoon that it came in. I had to get dinner going, all these sort of things, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to save it, but I wanted to read maybe just a page just to get a feel for it. And I picked it up and I started, and I think I got to page maybe 30, because the way you talk in the book, Brittany, it's almost as if you're telling the story to me, and I love that. It was as if we're sitting together, you and I, and you're sharing your experiences, like just straight direct. And I love that about your book. So can people, I saw on your website, can people still buy the autographed copy as well? Is that still an option?
They can, because I ordered extra
Gotcha.
autograph versions, which I'll mail anywhere in the world.
Oh.
But thank you so much. I enjoyed it. I certainly didn't write it with the intention in mind for it to be a page turner. It was more
it's a page turner.
As it happened, because I know that who knows how years from now, if they'll have just scrubbed all evidence of everything from the internet, and then they can just portray you remembered versus how it actually was.
Very true. Very true. That it was a page turner and a half. And I loved it. So Britt, the midterm elections, right? We still don't have a winner as of this moment. There's no projections really for the House, for the Senate. And you know, as I really got from your book and watching your YouTube videos and all that, you really played a big role in 2016 in helping, you know, defeat Hillary Clinton. And now it kind of seems like the media, from what I've seen anyway, is really pushing Ron DeSantis and, you know, telling us that MAGA candidates, they did poorly in these elections, that you know, the Trump effect is really hurting people. And so I wanted to ask you your thoughts. Do you think that the media is trying to tell us that MAGA candidates are doing poorly because, you know, they want to discourage his base? Or do you think that, you know, the so-called, I don't know, Trump effect of what we went through in 2016 has really worn off? What are your thoughts on all that?
Always trying to discourage the base of Trump, and they're always trying to destroy Trump. But as far as the Trump, to an extent, it has. So before we had this picture of Trump that he was, whole spiel was that he's a winner. He wanted everything he did. And then, and since he lost and then has been being battered down so much, his entire inner circle, he can't protect anybody. Or Alex Jones, who I know he wasn't his inner circle, but he was one of his biggest supporters and responsible for win, and Trump hasn't stuck up for him at all. I think that it's worn off to an extent how many people would vote for him if they would prefer DeSantis, because the thing is on the left. They own, you know, the media, Hollywood, the education system, you name it. You need a candidate on the right there, you know, for this reason, that is extremely charismatic, all that, and just marvel people the way Trump did. I don't know if DeSantis is that because he's not very, but he's done a lot of great things. So I would be curious to see if they decide to run against for the spot, the Republican spot. It would be interesting to see if I really can't call it now, but I would be obviously also curious to see. So yeah, I'm not really sure. Yeah, but I definitely agree with you that I see a cordon for DeSantis suddenly. Everybody's coming out. You have all these Daily Wire people, right wingers. Suddenly it's DeSantis and seems a bit coordinated.
Yeah, it does kind of seem coordinated. And, you know, so immediately I see that and my suspicions go up, right? Like, what is this media's slobbering love affair with Ron DeSantis? Is he going to, I guess you can kind of say, like, get into bed with them? You know, Mike Pence, you know, really let a lot of Republicans down. That Trump base that we saw in 2016, they really, you know, they were really disappointed in Pence. They felt like he didn't come up with where Trump kind of, you know, stood at all this. And you make a good point too, as Trump advertised himself as the winner, right? This guy succeeds, he wins, he gets results. And I think we saw a lot of that as during his presidency. I think we saw him deliver on a lot of what he said he would do. And that includes having to fight his own party, you know, and not just Democrats, but Republicans as well. So another question I would have for you about all this is, do you think that the 2016 election, do you think that base of Trump, because a lot of the races were pretty narrow, right? I mean, he won Pennsylvania, he won some of these states, very slim. Do you think this election denier, they keep pushing this to, you know, oh, he or she's an election denier. Do you think that is actually going to hurt him as well? Do you think his refusal really to say concede, as he did not do originally, do you think that is kind of turning voters off as well, that they want to kind of move on from this? Or do you think that he's energizing a bigger base by saying, you know what, we're getting screwed out of things here? Do you have any thoughts on that?
To be honest, I think the disappointment came go. I mean, had he immediately conceded, it might have been different. But the fact that he let it adamant that there had been some sort of election meddling, some fraud.
Yeah.
He was tweeting it like all day, every day. And then the fact that he just like gave up and was like, oh, here we go. That was a huge letdown to people. Plus the January 6th, how he didn't, of course, I'm not saying he should have supported anybody violent, but a lot of those people didn't do, held in a very unjust manner. And it's not to say that only Trump, down. So many people let Trump down in his own inner circle, people that should have had his back, people that should have. So it's not to say that it was only one-sided with Trump. And of course, nobody's perfect. He did all his failings. For me, it would just be, I want to see what happens. I'm not there or the other, because I was pretty gravely disappointed in certain things Trump did of his presidency. And, that's a much longer conversation. But as I said, especially with this system we have now, and there's just not a lot of people in that position that get the popularity and the backing that Trump has. So we'll have to see.
Very true. And I think that letdown was with Rudy Giuliani, and I forget her name, like that Cracklin or whatever they called her lady. Her name's escaping me, but you're right. I think they didn't concede, and they built the public up to think that, you know what, we're going to fight this and we're going to win this. We're going to overthrow these results. Almost like this vision of Trump coming in on like a tank and, and just, saving the country. And it didn't happen. We are left here with the Biden administration, which is, I think you even said in one of your videos that you posted recently, Brittany, there was stability under Trump. There was, whether people like it or not, there was this America kept a peace in the world. I think you recently said that, and it's true. And we certainly see the effects of it now. So speaking of in the world, I want to ask you as well, Brittany, you moved to Austria recently, and I want to ask you what the differences are that you notice that really stood out to you between American life and life in Austria.
Well, aside from the obvious being the language difference, though it's not High German as spoken in Germany, they have dialect and a lot of different words. But aside from that, I would say many things, like they're much more culturally focused, and their history as well. You have just museums everywhere that really have important pieces of history there. Austria stretches back, but also it's much slower paced. The U.S. people tend to just rush all around. I mean, you can see it even in Starbucks, which is the most popular coffee shop. Everyone's just rushing in and grabbing their coffee and going to work. Whereas you have this very distinct cafe culture in France and Italy, and you see people there sitting for hours reading the paper, drinking their coffee. It's just they remember to stop and enjoy life a little more, I guess you could say. It's not to say a big difference I noticed. And there's many, almost everything.
So has it had its effect on you though, right? Because you were pretty, you were, especially from your book, like you're pretty active, like go, let's go here, let's go there. Has it slowed you down a little bit? Have you kind of felt the effects of
Absolutely. And I like it because I think you can forget to kind of certain moments. You don't always have to have your phone be filming this and that, but I was very much in that mode. Or something and get the news out, or go to this place and interview these people, go to this rally. I am very balanced. And of course, being a mother now, I don't travel to these and do these dangerous things that I'm like, what was I thinking? But now I still obviously do YouTube, but I'm trying the types of things I go out and do.
Yeah, awesome. Absolutely. So another thing, that I wanted to mention with you, Brittany, your latest YouTube video, and this I really hit home for me, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it as well. It was like, you talk about this compromise that all of a sudden these people want to make, right? They shut down our lives. They closed our businesses. They told us you can't go to this Starbucks and get the cup of coffee and read the newspaper. I even know a family personally that their son got very ill. He died, he passed, and his parents were told, you can't come in here. And they watched their son die through the hospital window. And now these people are coming out and they're telling us, like, oh, we just need to make a compromise. We need to move on from this. So what do you think, like, our response should be? How do you answer that? How do you tell these people, like, I don't want your compromise? What's a good response?
Right. I just have to say, firstly, wow, that is absolutely horrific. It's thankfully had to go through nothing near as terrible as that. And I'm so sorry for that poor family. Actually,
Sure.
it's so tempting to just come out so hard swinging against these people, to kind of give them even that they've put the world through. I was talking with a priest who's the full priest I've ever met. His name's Father James Maudsley. I was talking with him the other day, and he kind of pointed definitely these people do deserve justice, and who may have participated in this. It's not exactly as if they were, we shouldn't be going at their throats, because a lot of them are just, they completely believe this, bought into it too. They were terrified. It doesn't, excuse the things they did, but it's not best to just attack every single person who supported this. The real people responsible are the ones who actually positions power and made these decisions, who censored and shut down other people, anybody differing opinion, a correct opinion that they, censored. So in favor of course, holding the people responsible who were at the top responsible for this, as if we're ever going to see that. But, it would be great to see, them get their day in court.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned as well, Brittany, like, Austria, they were really strict there, right? Like, you couldn't do anything. Did you say 3 times? 3 times maybe they did these full shutdowns?
3 times. And one of them, it was many months. It might have been 6 to 7 or so long. I can't even remember much from that time, because I literally just stayed in my time, church or the supermarket. That's it. And as I mentioned, for some of it, they shut down the church. So we had to meet in this. It was really cool. It was like a catacomb mass, a secret house in this big room where there was no electricity, just candles, like hundreds of candles and mass. And it was just the most encouraging, beautiful thing to see people still go to mass and trying to tell us whether or not we could worship God. So that was very encouraging to see amid insanity that was going on. But Austria was one of the strictest countries in the world. They were the try to have mandatory vaccination.
Yeah, and and you have, your son is about a year maybe now, or a little less.
Yeah.
So right, he's still
a year in like
okay,
he's a year in
so
like 2 weeks.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's got to be hard for you, like, your instinct is going to be to protect him from all of this, and your instinct, is just going to be, you don't want him to see all these things. So it's probably really hard, as a mom now to, have a son, have a child that, is facing the world with all of this chaos going on. And so, like you said, holding these people responsible, like what they've done to our lives is dreadful. And I don't think they seem to care more than anything. They live in their elitist bubble, right, where there's no repercussions for whatever they do, and they'll watch people suffer, and they just, there's just whatever, they get away with everything. I mean, you saw this, Britt, in your book with Hillary Clinton. I think you talk about the Podesta emails, right? We had all this stuff on Pizzagate. I think you even share some of the emails in your book about all that, and nobody cares. Nothing comes of it, and it's that. Why do you think that is, though? Like, why do we have these mounds of evidence that the Clintons were doing these things, and nobody seems to be able to put the final blow in?
Well, I would say because the saying that you can be too honest for politics, and I wouldn't say that's a day throughout all time. But it's certainly true now. You have a system that is so corrupt that if you are, it is extremely difficult to get elected in such a system, to be implement any sort of change, because it's so rotten. For example, if you outlawed abortion tomorrow, who is pro-abortion, that got a and just reverse it. What you have to do is change the hearts and minds so that they would never want such a thing. And that's how you same with these people. With a system so corrupt, they can't be held to account because everyone's in on it, whether it's judges.
Yeah.
So
do you think, last question, do you think that actually hurt Trump as well? Because, you remember his famous line, like, it's a good thing you're not in charge of the laws in our country. And he said, well, you'd be in jail. A lot of that didn't materialize. So do you think people thought with him or see with him that they didn't quite get, this hammer of Washington that they thought they were getting?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they overestimated how much power actually Trump had, and he was just trying to get, laughs. He was trying to entertain people, garner more support. Doesn't happen. Someone doesn't get elected and swoop in and change everything, throw all the corrupt people in jail. It's too much of people looked at him too much as a savior, and I think thing to do. I wouldn't recommend it because a lot of people looked at him as the savior, and then they're like, well, I don't have to do any of it all. It's good to look up to people, to have your heroes, people you but you shouldn't put so much faith in them that you think you don't have to do any work yourself. It's important for everybody, whether it be locally or even just praying. That's a wonderful thing too, and very helpful. But put too much on Trump's shoulders as if he's going to carry the entire world, and that's just
Very true. Very true. Well, Brittany, thank you for coming on. Author of the book Patriots Not Welcome. You can get a copy on Amazon. You could order off her store. You can get a signed copy as well. So make sure to check that out. Follow her on YouTube. Follow her on Twitter. Brittany, thank you for coming on. It was really great chatting with you today.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Make the world Catholic again.